It is the year 1917, the beginning of World War I. Germany is invading France on the Western Front. The war was only for a couple of hundred meters of land, but it took the lives of thousands of young soldiers. The movie begins in North Germany, where we meet four teenagers, Paul, Albert, Ludwig, and Franz, who are arriving at their school. They've been discussing joining the war efforts, and they are all interested, not knowing what they are getting into. During this time, teenagers at their age were allowed by the school to join the army only if their parents gave permission. Paul tells his friends that his mother said he can't join, for which his friends mock him. Franz then came up with the smartest idea ever, for Paul to forge his mother's signature so that they could all go to war together, which is exactly what Paul does. Back at school, before submitting the letter of approval, the principal gives a motivational speech to encourage his students who are going to war. It seems like nobody knows what war means, as we see everyone excited and smiling with no fear. The reason they wanted to go wasn't to defend their country but literally so that they could be seen as cool in the eyes of the public. Flash forward as the group is now getting into their uniform and are directed towards the battlefield. We see everyone still smiling and laughing as they are walking towards camp, not realizing that this will be the last time they are happy for a while. When they arrive at camp, they are instantly met with a harsh reality. A doctor tells them to get off the truck as they need it to transport the wounded soldiers to the hospital. The group begins to walk. "Welcome to the front lines, boys." After many miles, bombs start dropping and the commander tells everyone to wear their gas masks. Paul was late in doing this, so he was punished by having to finish the march without being allowed to take it off. Brutal. At the base, the boys met their vice commander, Stanislaus Kat Kaczynski. Unlike their other superiors, Kat was kind, a breath of fresh air in the chaos. That night, Paul and Albert were on guard duty when they heard footsteps. Paul got excited, thinking it was his chance to show off his shooting skills. He fires a shot, and misses. Oops. That miss gave away their position, and the enemy returned fire. Paul's helmet got clipped, and the near-death experience left him shook. Helmet 1. Paul's aim 0. Suddenly, an enemy attack came. The commander ordered all his men to take cover. Kat explained that these attacks are happening constantly and to get used to them. The German weapons are outdated compared to the French and they had no choice but to stay hidden and take cover. The situation becomes intense and we see one of the soldiers panic, which does not help and things get chaotic. The base was destroyed by a bomb which buried Paul and fellow soldiers under the dirt. The next day, Paul, who was still buried, gets rescued by Albert and other comrades. The reality of war is hitting hard now. Paul didn't expect it to be this intense. Traumatized, he sat in silence. Kat tried to cheer him up with bread, but the horrors were just beginning. They were ordered to collect the ID tags of the dead soldiers. Paul accidentally stepped on Ludwig's glasses while doing so. Frantically searching, he found Ludwig's lifeless body among the corpses. He froze, devastated, but there was no time to grieve. Months pass, and we see Paul getting used to his new reality. Paul and Kat are out on a walk and they notice a small farm near the forest and a familiar smell is dragging them towards it. It has been a while since they had a decent meal and they notice some livestock in which they quickly decide to steal. Kat goes in while Paul stands guard outside. After some time, a gunshot was heard from inside and Paul scrambles. Turns out, the farmer caught Kat stealing a goose and shoots at him, which luckily for them they managed to escape. Back at base, Kat calls Paul, Albert, Franz, and a soldier named Jaden over to taste their Michelin star meal. For the first time in a while they are happy and savoring a good meal. The next day rolls around and while they are peeling potatoes, they notice a few girls walking around. Franz, who is braver than the rest, goes over to charm them and returns with a handkerchief one had given him. He tells Paul to sniff it, just in case he never sees a woman again. Franz is a good friend, much respect. Playtime is over, and that afternoon we see Paul writing a letter to his family back home. Kat comes over asking for help to read a letter from his wife. The letter writes that she misses her husband and can't wait for him to come home so they can visit their child's grave. Hearing this, Kat vents his feelings about failing to be a good father. When his child was sick, he never had time to visit because he was at war. He explains how nobody, even the high-ranking officials, don't even want to be there and are all trapped by false government promises. They are promised good money, but in reality it is nothing. The next day, Paul, Albert, Franz, Kat, and Jaden are ordered to find the missing 60 soldiers after the last attack by the French. They make their way to the location in which Kat points out a smell that reminds him of poisonous gas. He was sure that if he's right they would have made their way somewhere to hide. In a warehouse nearby they go and look to find them, and instead Paul stumbles upon 60 soldiers lying dead on the floor. Paul screams for his friends. When Kat sees the condition of the corpses in front of him, he knew that those soldiers who were lifelessly lying in front of them met their death by inhaling a fatal amount of poisonous gas. That night in the German base, the German war general was furious. He was annoyed with the decision that the government made by humbling themselves to France and begged for the war to stop. Even though Germany did not have tanks or great combat equipment, he still believed that his troops would be able to win the war. Man, just let it be over. The next morning, the delegations between Germany and France met on a train. One of the German delegates, Matthias, begged the French to stop their tanks from attacking their troops because they had lost way too many soldiers on the battlefield. The French delegation then gave him a folder containing several agreements that the Germans should sign. The French gave Germany 72 hours to negotiate, and as long as the negotiations had not been legally signed, the war would continue as usual. While these negotiations are pending, we are back on the battlefield and the German soldiers are preparing to start the attack. No one wants to be there. The attack begins, and the French quickly start taking the offense, showing up with tanks that rip through the German formation. The German bullets barely do anything and the French reinforce their already overpowered approach with flamethrowers, in which Paul watches his close friend Albert get burned alive. Paul is horrified and begins running back to the trenches. He is ordered by a commander to grab ammunition and help out, which he attempts at doing but in the process slips and falls into a hole. Afraid that he would get killed, Paul plays dead. Suddenly he realizes that there actually is a Frenchman right behind him, and is saved at the last minute by a comrade who shoots him. He falls and Paul grabs his knife and repeatedly stabs the French soldier. Paul watches him die and begins to regret this decision. When Paul checked the French soldier's ID, it turned out that the person whom he had just killed was the same as him. They both had families and were caught up in this war. There was nothing Paul could do but keep apologizing for what he had just done. Back on the train where the negotiations are happening, the Germans are arguing about what direction they should take, and Matthias reminds them that no matter what, they are not in a position to see who is stronger, as it is impossible for them to win. This was a decision whether they want to preserve the lives of thousands of soldiers still out there fighting. The delegations meet again and Matthias tells the representatives that they will try to fulfill the conditions set by France, and the Germans sign the agreement to end the war. The French agreed that by 11 a.m. on November 11th, the war will officially be declared over. Thank the Lord. Meanwhile, Paul is back at camp. He is visibly confused as to why soldiers are cheering and congratulating each other. One of the soldiers there told him that the government had broadcast that the war between them and France would end the next day at 11. Soon, they would all be able to go home and meet each other's families. Paul was very happy, but there was an important thing he had to do. He needed to go find all of his friends. Paul goes to the treatment room. There were lots of wounded soldiers who had not been treated, lying while bearing their injuries. Among the soldiers, Paul saw Jaden. Unfortunately, Jaden was badly injured. His leg was so damaged that the doctor had to amputate it. Jaden then gave him Franz's handkerchief and told him that in the battle earlier, Franz had died. Once again, Paul had lost his best friend. Jaden said that rather than being sad, Paul should be grateful because he was still alive and not injured in the slightest. Jaden calms down and Paul goes away to look for food. On his way to the kitchen, Paul, still burdened by his friend's death, tied Franz's handkerchief around his neck as a tribute to his friends. When he arrived at the kitchen, everyone was yelling for food. Paul sees Kat and is instantly relieved. Not everyone was gone. They both sit and eat soup together, talking about the battle that occurred. Paul makes his way back to find Jaden to bring him food. Before digging into his plate, Jaden asks for a fork and spoon, which instead of using to eat, he quickly stabs himself in the neck. They are shocked, and as he is dying, Jaden says that he would rather die than live disabled. Paul and Kat were silent as they watched their friend die. The next day, when Paul woke up, he was confused when he saw Kat staring outside. Kat said that for the first time in 4 years of fighting, he didn't hear a single sound of gunshots. He decided to go for a walk to celebrate that freedom. Along the way, Kat said that he couldn't wait to go home. He wanted to kiss and hug his wife tightly. Kat also told Paul that it was better for him to continue his studies so that in the future, he could become a great person. On their walk, they accidentally passed the farm where they had stolen a goose before. Joking around, they said they should go and steal one again before they head home. It was Paul's turn to go in this time while Kat guarded outside. Inside, because the geese were still goslings, Paul decided to just steal the eggs, but again, they were caught by the owner of the farm. He and his son tried to shoot them. Thankfully, they managed to get away. Some of the eggs break, but they managed to salvage most of it. Later, while Kat was peeing in the forest, the son of the farm owner showed up while pointing a gun at him. Soon after, Paul hears a gunshot and immediately runs to the situation. He saw Kat walking and seemed okay. Paul was relieved, but suddenly, Kat falls to the ground. It turned out he had been shot in his stomach. In a panic, Paul rushed to carry him back to the camp. Unfortunately, when the doctor in the camp checked on his condition, he said that there was nothing he could do to save him. Paul is broken. One by one, all of his friends have died and he's had to bear witness. The next day, the general's assistant brings the remaining soldiers together in the courtyard. He announces that everyone is going home, but before that he wants them to return to the battlefield to seize the border. He mentions that the war is not over yet and there are a few hours. Are you kidding me? All the soldiers are upset. The generals don't care about saving their men and want to selfishly keep their land. The soldiers have no choice but to obey this final order. While walking to the battlefield, Paul asked the time from a young soldier next to him. The soldier answered that it was 10:45. Only a few minutes were left before the war was officially over. The only thing the soldiers had in mind was to stay alive until it was time. After getting ready, the Germans began to attack. In the middle of the war, Paul saw the young soldier whom he had asked the time earlier being attacked by a French soldier. He immediately helped him. Paul and the soldier fell into a French bunker. For a moment, they both stopped while looking at each other, waiting for time, hoping that the clock would move faster. But suddenly, another French soldier appeared and stabbed Paul right in the heart. The clock struck 11, and the war was officially over. The commander's voice was heard yelling to the soldiers to stop the fight. Paul was very sad because, in the final seconds, his heart had to be stabbed. With the last strength he had, Paul slowly got out of the bunker. Outside, he could breathe the peace in the air. No more explosions or screaming. The war had ended. On the other hand, the German general was silent, listening to the sound of the clock, not because he was sad that many of his troops had died, but because he was disappointed that the Germans had failed to seize the land. The general's assistant comes to the battlefield and tells the remaining soldiers, including the young soldier Paul had saved, to collect the ID necklaces of the fallen. One by one, we see the young soldier collecting necklaces until suddenly, his footsteps stop. He saw the body of the man who saved him sitting stiff, right in front of the bunker. The young soldier gives his final salute to Paul by tying his handkerchief to his neck. Paul had followed his friends into death, escaping the cruelty of the world. I give this movie a 9.3. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.